There's a typewritten question. Let me read it out to you. In life, we are taught to give minimal attention to the physical body. We are taught to think of the foulness of the body. That is only a shell that is not linked to the mind. The relics after cremation are nothing more than the remains of the skeleton that couldn't be converted to ashes. Can Luang Por please comment on why so much significance and reverence are given to relics of the Buddha or highly realized lamas and monastics? It seems incongruous. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Well, they symbolize enlightenment, simply speaking, and enlightenment is probably what you're aiming for in your practice. If you've come this far to the point where you're following the Buddhist path. So the Buddha said it's the one thing, one material thing that is worth revering, venerating. So he said it is appropriate to build stupas, chetiyas, shrines to Buddhas and enlightened beings, disciples of the Buddha. And you may collect the relics after a cremation and put them in such a place. And of course, on the one hand, you're correct. They're just the physical remains of a human body. Once cremation is performed, you just get a few fragments of bones and ashes. Nothing very beautiful or exciting in themselves, but it's what they symbolize, that link to the enlightened mind. One thing they say is that the enlightened mind leaves an imprint on the physical body while the Buddha or the Arahant is alive. And that's why relics often crystallize. It's the gradual impression of that pure mind on the body. When after cremation they can turn into crystal. Again, that's just it's still just a chemical process. It's just a natural process, but it's again pointing to or reminding us of the enlightened mind. And they also say these relics have a certain energy to them. Some people who are psychic see the aura around the relics, the brightness of them, and that's what attracts people. Often people don't realize themselves that why they're particularly attracted, but there's a certain peace or serenity, and that can be seen or known by somebody with psychic ability. But even if you're skeptical of that, that's okay. It's more what they symbolize. They're reminding us, they're objects to remind us or to help us recollect the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the enlightened Sangha, which is what we aspire to. We aspire to remove our own greed, anger, and delusion from this mind, to cultivate the path, to experience the deathless of Nibbana. And we believe and have faith that this is the highest happiness, the highest that human beings can achieve. So if you're following the Buddhist path, that's your goal. So this is simply a reminder of the goal, or it's something that can help you remember the goal, keep the goal in mind. It's not the goal itself for you. Those relics, whether you see them or not, that's not going to necessarily influence whether you reach Nibbana or not, but it can be a skillful means to remind you of the Buddha and the path of practice that will lead to the end of suffering. So just another skillful means. It's like the same as the Tripitaka. Maybe some people, they don't have much faith in relics, but they have faith in the words of the Buddha. So they read the suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma. Those books themselves also will not bring you enlightenment. You have to practice what you read in those books, put it into practice. But still we give great respect to the Tripitaka. You know, in monasteries, we put the Tripitaka up on a high shelf. We don't tread on it or step over it or put cups of coffee on the suttas. We try not to anyway, because we give respect to that which is a useful means, skillful means for help, a skillful aid to help us get to Nibbana. But it's not Nibbana, but it's still something of value. Or Buddha statues or little images, replicas of the Buddha and so on. Even a monastery is just, you know, a piece of property with trees and grass and rocks. It's just a piece of land. But once it's been donated as an arama, as a place of residence of Buddhist monks or nuns, we even give that place respect, because it's a place, it's like a sanctuary, a spiritual sanctuary for practicing the Dhamma for enlightenment. So the place itself is still just rocks and trees and buildings, but it's what it symbolizes, and that translates into our heart, brings up very wholesome qualities in the heart. So sometimes you go to a monastery, especially a monastery that's been around for a while, many good qualities come up in your heart when you're there. You have faith, maybe feel very peaceful, feel energized, you feel certain spiritual qualities arise simply by being in the place. And no one's trying to say the rocks are enlightened or the bricks of the building are enlightened, or the trees, or, you know, the birds in the monastery are more enlightened than the birds outside the monastery. But still, you go to a monastery or a religious building, it brings up certain qualities of mind that help you in your practice. And we need these things. You know, we do need some material, physical things to help us along the way. You know, you've got to either hear the teachings or read them in order to know what to practice. And sometimes it's useful to have a place of practice, so a monastery. And in a monastery, you may have religious icons, you have a statue, again, just as a focal point for bringing up certain spiritual qualities. But it's not essential. You know, you could just be in the forest, a quiet place, meditating, and you can still develop all the qualities of the path as well. Or you could be in your house in a busy street, in a busy city, and still develop these qualities as well. But sometimes we need these things to help us. They help us along the way. So we have monasteries and temples and statues and places where we keep relics, and we have the Tripitaka in either online now or in books. You know, all of this can help, can support the practice, but it's not enlightenment itself, and we don't mistake it for that, but we use these all as skillful means or tools for the practice.
Sadhu Nampa. The person who asked this question, you didn't leave your name. I hope that answers your question. Following on Nampa, Jennifer has a question, which is she recently came across the 8 stages of dying. And it seems that this literature is from the Tibetan tradition. She found it interesting. And she wants to know if this is found in the Theravada traditions or the suttas.
I'm not an expert, and I haven't died yet either. But you know, as far as I know, there's nothing corresponding to the eight stages of dying. They can still be very useful. You know, sometimes we can gain something from other traditions. So the Mahayana tradition has many interesting and inspiring teachings and explanations of things. But you know, Theravada tradition talks more about the practice of vipassana. I guess the Abhidhamma goes into great detail of the mental moments of consciousness arising, passing away, and just before death, and then consciousness arising in the next life, and so on. But maybe there's a certain, from the wisdom you get from the practice of the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, But there's certain qualities you develop, aren't there? That you're developing wisdom, insight, understanding of the impermanence of the physical body, and particularly from the Abhidhamma, you do get teachings on how the body degenerates just before death, and how the breath leaves the body, the heat, the temperature leaves the body. We have meditations on the decomposition of the corpse after death. We have explanations in the Abhidhamma about as I said, about consciousness and the conditioned nature of consciousness, and how it arises and leads on to rebirth in other realms after death, and so on. So that there's plenty to study if you're interested in that. Or you could take a more practical approach and just develop very strong mindfulness and this reflective quality of mind through your life, so that whenever death comes, because one thing, we can talk about 8 stages of death, but one thing is sure, is that is that we don't quite know when we're going to die or how. And quite often it's a big surprise when it happens. But if you're preparing yourself through developing wise reflection, mindfulness every day, and maybe you do a meditation on death every day, at least a brief one, reflecting on the impermanence of life, the fact that this body, these 5 khandhas, your body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, sense consciousness, are all impermanent, and eventually this body and mind will die. You reflect on that. You're preparing yourself for death. So it's another way to approach it. The practical meditation and mental development of insight into the impermanent nature of body and mind is preparing you for death. And your aim is to remove suffering that is fed by delusion, by ignorance and delusion. That's your aim, and that will help you prepare for death. That's Ajahn Chah used to talk about dying before you die. Dying from delusion, from ignorance, delusion, greed, anger, delusion. Letting all those mental defilements die brings your mind more and more closer to the deathless, and getting to the point where you actually see death is really just a process of nature. It's not something to fear or worry about, because a lot of human fear, anxiety is based on attachment to life and fear of death. But getting your mind to the point where you can recognize death is just a natural culmination of life. Whatever's born must die. There's no way around that. You're getting your mind to really see and accept that truth. Whatever is born dies, whatever arises ceases, and that's just the way it is. Whether we like it or not, whether we have an opinion about it or not, that's just the way it is. And the more that insight is established, then you're preparing yourself for the inevitable end of your life, whenever that may be. But the physical and mental changes that are going on prior to death, well, that is something that as you practice mindfulness and investigate the truth, well, you're preparing for. And you may learn something by being with relatives or friends before they die. You can learn from that, or from your own observations of your own body and mind also through your life.
Thank you, Sadhu Lumpur. Sister Sakita, please hang on a minute, okay? Let me ask Lumpur 2 more questions. Lumpur, this is with regards to meditation. There are 2 questions here. Maybe if I can read them out together for you, and you could take them together. Right. So this person says, when I meditate, I pay attention to the rising and falling of my breath. After some time, the mind is calm, bright, and there is collectedness. At this moment, the question is, Lumpur, is there attachment to the mind at this stage when there's collectedness? How should I let go and transcend the mind? So this is a meditator speaking about her experience, Lumpur. And I take the second question because I think they're interrelated. The second question here is, if we have a lot of craving and attachment, is it better not to practice metta? If so, what object should we meditate on?
Okay, you might have to remind me of the second question later. I'll go back to the first. And now you have to remind me of the first. Just go with the first.
The first is this person,
yeah,
when they meditate at rising and falling, and the mind is calm and bright and collected. So at this point in time, the question is there attachment to the mind at this stage?
Well, you have to answer that question yourself. There could be attachment or maybe not. Attachment can arise at any time in the practice, even in the very refined states of mind. Even we get attached to samadhi, the bliss of samadhi, and we can attach to insight. And we have these defilements of insight even, which come from attachment. So whether it's just attachment to very ordinary things like, we're grumpy, angry, sad, worried, afraid, or very refined states of bliss in samadhi, the attachment can come into our experience at any time. So one of the trainings we develop is just insight into the impermanent nature of conditions. And that includes states of samadhi, observing arising and falling. You can have maybe a sense of self form that I am one who sees or knows arising and falling. I see the impermanent nature of this body and mind. That is me. And you can still form a subtle sense of self or a subtle conceit around that kind of insight. So you have to keep investigating. Ajahn Chah used to say, wherever there's suffering, there's attachment. Wherever there's attachment, there's suffering. So that's one of the keys or the avenues, the pathways, is to look into your experience. So we're always reflecting. Say you have a very deep and profound meditation experience, and that's good. And it's probably come about through a lot of effort and putting good effort, wholesome effort into your practice. That's something good, but you may still attach to it. Any feelings of bliss, rapture, peace that arise afterwards, you have to reflect on the impermanent nature of that, the impermanent nature of the factors, the qualities of samadhi, the mind of samadhi. Reflect on that. Otherwise, then we can often start to form a new sense of self based on our meditative experience or the memory of it. We have a memory, it was really good, it was like this happened, that happened, and then that memory becomes who we are. We identify with that memory. So then we go around remembering what we've done, but it's no longer alive or current experience. It's, you're just remembering what happened once before. So there's plenty of practice to do after good experiences and clarity of insight. You keep contemplating, keep reflecting on the impermanent nature of things. So that's that question. The other question was,
if we have a lot of craving and attachment, is it better not to practice too much metta? If so, metta. If so, what meditation object would Luang Por recommend?
Well, all the Noble Eightfold Path factors we cultivate them to deal with craving and attachment, to ultimately abandon them by developing knowledge, insight, mindfulness, wisdom. But in the course of developing that path, and we may notice certain kinds of craving and attachment based on our own karma, our own past, and our own personality, the characteristics of our personality. So we may develop certain practices or emphasize them during different periods of our practice or the development of our practice. So, metta is an essential practice to develop. You need metta. There's no way around it, because you need to have goodwill for yourself and others. But the Buddha pointed out metta has its dangers. So one danger with metta is that it can turn into lust. particularly if you have metta for the object, people who you would normally might have lust for, usually the opposite sex, but not always. If you have metta for people and it's turning into lustful attachment, clinging, craving, well, that's something you have to contemplate the impermanence of, and manage your metta so you don't overdo it, end up going around falling in love with everyone. The other enemy of metta is anger. So like say you're angry with someone and you want to have metta or goodwill for that person because you recognize the suffering of your anger, so you start thinking of that person, but because your anger is so deeply ingrained, you think of that person and you can't find any metta. You keep returning to the experience of anger, and that's not good either. So every Dhamma has its dangers. Every quality we're developing has its dangers. So you have to see what your character requires. So some people find reflecting on the loathsomeness, the unattractiveness of the body very good, very helpful to calm the mind and to counter lust and the obsession with say, sexual desire and the attractiveness of the body. But some people do it and they become really angry and really depressed. So sometimes that's not the right object to develop. If you're still becoming very angry or depressed, we'll develop a more pacifying object like the breath, which is very neutral. So that's how the Anapanasati Sutta came about. Monks were doing a lot of contemplation of the unattractiveness of the body, becoming very depressed. So the Buddha gave the teaching on mindfulness of breathing so they can focus on that. And that brings a much more neutral, balanced state of mind. So you have to see what works for you. You go partly by results. If some meditation practice or reflection is making you feel more peaceful, bringing you some clarity, some insight, well, that's a good sign. But if it's increasing your craving and attachment, you're becoming more lustful or more angry or more deluded, well, obviously you need to adjust. And practice involves a certain amount of adjustment, practicing for a while, then reflecting on the results of your practice and seeing what you might need to change.
Thank you, Lampo. I think one of the things as a lay practitioner that we need to also be patient with our own practice and not constantly seek for external validation as to whether this point is right or are we doing the right thing. But I think it's like you said, Lampo, constant investigation and be patient because realization and insight just happens.
True. One of the results of following craving is we tend to be impatient. We jump around looking for different things to satisfy the mind. So that even applies to meditation. So sometimes you try one meditation technique or object for a little while and you're not satisfied with the results. So craving makes you try something else. So we call it the supermarket approach to meditation. So you're constantly picking new brands, new products all the time. So your mind never really settles down. You're just jumping around. So sometimes you do need to be very patient and just keep exploring maybe one thing till you've either found that it can bring you some peace and understanding, or it's not working at all. It's just you're hitting a brick wall, always running into obstacles. So then maybe you need to change. But you need to give yourself time before you reach that point.
Sister Sukita, you have a question still? Do you like to unmute yourself?
Longpo, good evening. Okay, the question actually is, during sitting, when the mind becomes very calm, then I try to get out of the calm and so that I can get some insight into what is happening to the mind and the body. However, it is very difficult to visualize the head hair, body hair, nail, teeth, and skin. It takes quite a long time, sometimes very hard to visualize. So I will give up because it becomes like forcing myself then that is not right, correct? If anything, it should surface on its own. May Long Po advise me and guide me along this. So, yeah, that's the question. Thank you, Long Po. Sorry.
Yeah, our mind is in a different state probably each time we meditate. Sometimes we are very relaxed and the meditation is easier. It's easier to establish mindfulness, easier to contemplate. And when the mind is more peaceful, mindfulness is more continuous. That's definitely the time to contemplate the physical body, say the 32 parts, to visualize them, analyze them, because of the peace of mind will allow that to take place effectively and easily. But like you say, sometimes your mind is very rigid or stubborn or stuck in some way, or stuck with some mood or whatever, so it just doesn't want to do it. And you have to accept that. Sometimes you may push yourself a bit, you get to know yourself, whether you can still push yourself a bit more than your mind is allowing you, and you just keep working at it, keep pushing to contemplate the body. If that's what you're working on, go through the 32 parts of the body or one particular part, and just keep at it through patient effort. Sometimes you do that. Other times you just change your object. When you're very sleepy, sometimes there's nothing you can do. You certainly can't contemplate the body. What do? Well, you have to find some way to wake yourself up. Maybe do walking meditation or chanting, or focus your mind on a light or something, just to wake yourself up. Or if you're totally exhausted, you just go to bed. It's not always, there's not only one way, is there? Sometimes part of meditation practice, when you do it regularly, is getting to know yourself and what works, what has worked in the past, and when to stick with something and when to have a break or change, try something else, and don't get too serious about it. Don't get too stressed about it. Don't make stress out of your meditation. If your mind is really stubborn today, just accept that. Oh, now I'm going to get to know what the stubborn mind is like, and it's like this, and it feels like this, and it's full of all kinds of moods and thoughts, and it's not cooperating. Okay, it's like this, and you can still learn from the stubborn mind, the worried mind, the distracted mind. Try to have that attitude of learning from your experience. Even what you might call a bad experience is something you can learn from, rather than always giving in or giving up. See, what can I learn from this particular mood I'm experiencing today, or what is working, what's not working. We can learn from everything.
Long Po, in this instance, it is more like when the mind is very peaceful, I guess there's an underlying attachment to the peace and just wanting to continue. But as Long Po says correctly, like just now, if I were to continue to pursue and pursue, then that 4 parts of the body will come up. It's more.
Yeah, well, when you say peaceful, the important thing is to say, are you mindful? Because peace can just be a feeling that can dull us. We actually become dull when we feel peaceful sometimes. It's pleasant, and so your mind it's not asleep, but it's going dull. It's not investigating, not looking for anything more at that time. It's like accepting the peace as good enough, which can become a habit. And many meditators have this habit. They get to a point where they're very peaceful, but they're no longer reflecting or learning anything. And it can lead on to sleepiness, or even if they're not sleepy, they're just sitting there dull, kind of numb. And particularly if you've had stress, then numbness can be quite pleasant, but it's not giving you any particular knowledge or insight. So sometimes you have to come out of that and go, like you say, investigate. So that's one of the reasons we turn to the body, then go through the 32 parts of the body and work at it, visualize them, ask questions, reflect on them, contemplate the impermanence, the sensations arising, passing away, and so on. you give your mind work to do to bring it out of its dullness, if that's the problem. I'm not saying you have that problem, but just be aware that this can be a problem for meditators.
Okay, understand. Thank you, Long Phong. Sadhu.
Do we have any last questions from the floor, please? Well, for anyone who's got burning questions, keep at your practice. Keep your practice strong, because Luang Por is going to set foot, land in Singapore pretty soon, in just a couple of weeks. And I think he's going to come around to check on every one of us for all the questions that we've been asking for the last 2.5 years about meditation and practice. He's going to come face to face and eye to eye with us. So please be prepared to welcome Luang Por as he visits Singapore. And for those who are living in Malaysia, if you're close by and if you'd like to come and visit Luang Por and stay at the monastery, you're welcome to join us. We make facility where you could stay at the Palawai monastery if you wish. So and Luang Por, any last words before we take leave from you for the evening?
Oh, I just express my appreciation for all your efforts in the practice. As Bita just said, keep practicing, keep up your Dhamma practice, and this will bring you more peace and understanding.